So today we're going to look at some rules for bearings. There's three rules for bearings, and then we're going to talk about compasses, bearings, and why we use them, and how exactly we're going to write these things down. So, first rule we're going to look at is we always measure from north. That means if I have a point here, A, and I'm going to some point B, I'm always measuring from this north. Okay, measuring B from A, and that happens from north. So always set your north as 0. So that is where we'll set 0 on our protractor when we measure. Okay? Or if you're calculating, that is your 0. Okay? Next, direction of measure is clockwise. So from that north spot, like I said, you put your protractor on there, and that you'll measure it to that line and get a degree. Right? If you're calculating, that's just setting your 0 point up there and then measuring clockwise around when you're doing calculating. And then lastly, the three-figure coordinates. For the most part, this will not affect you if your numbers are greater than 100, but if not, if we have an angle such as 60 degrees, the bearing we write is simply 060. Okay? So I sometimes put it as with a degree symbol just to kind of get you used to seeing it. The second thing that you may know some of them already is we have to talk about compass directions, because bearings they're used in navigation on Earth, and the compass why we use it in bearings is because we can always find where north is, right? We have a compass that'll always point to north, so we can always base our coordinates off of north. Hence why we set north as 0 degrees, and why we measure clockwise, right? Because we have to have some kind of standard. So our task is to name and give bearings to the following. So I'm going to want you to pause at each section, give it a go, and then I'm going to go through the answers. So first thing are 4 directions, right? So what are the 4 directions listed, and what bearings would they give? Okay? So this first one, give it a go. Try and even get the 4 directions, and then you'll see what the bearings are going to start to look like. So when you start doing the 8 direction, 16 direction, you'll be able to take more of a guess. Okay, so most of you should know that the top one here, well, this top one is simply north. So we denote that with an N and 0, 0, 0. Then we're moving, if that's 0 and we move 90 degrees, right? That's a right angle. So that's 0, 9, 0. And that's east, which we would denote with an E. Then, coming next, we have south, which we add on another 90 degrees. Or from north, it's a 180 degree angle, right? If you look at those as angles. So that's 180 degrees, and we denote that with an S. And lastly, we have west, which, if you've guessed, we add another 90, which is 270 degrees. We denote that with a W, and you can check that you're right, because if we add on another 90, we get back to 360, which is a full circle. So this is what we're going to start to fill in with the other ones, right? What happens if we're between north and east? What about south and east, etc.? So here, when we want to name, we always put a primary direction letter first. So this is for 8 direction, right? We'll have a slightly different rule for 16, but this is the main new one that you have to understand and be able to find their bearings. So I'm going to first just go with what we know. Well, we know north is 0. We know our east was 90. We know our south was 180. And we know our west was 270. I'm going to do the first one for you. So we want the primary direction letter first. So that is north or south when it's 8 points. So, well, if we're on the top, and I'm going to look at this one just to the right. I'm looking at this one right now. So I want to put the primary direction letter first. So I want to put N. And then what's the second? Well, it's in between N and E. So I'm going to guess it's NE. The way that we say this is north of east. So it's always the first thing of the second. So that's, you'll see those in questions, the word questions, it'll say, something, 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 north of east. So, now, if you notice, I got that 45 degrees by just taking the difference. So 90 minus 0, okay? So 90, you take the difference between the two angles, 90 minus 0, and then we half it, right? Because we want it in half. So that's 45. So that is where our 45 degrees came from. Okay, because it's exactly halfway. What's halfway in between 0 and 90? Well, that's 45. So that's our, you could think of it as a mid. So I have done that first one for you. I would like you to try now. Pause the video and fill in the rest of the blanks. And for ambitious people, try and say what it is. So this one was north of east. All right. So let's go through them. So here our primary was south. So south of east. So SE, southeast. Then we have southwest, right? Primary, the closest thing is the south. So south of west, southwest. Then our last one is, well, if our primary is north, it should be NW, north of west, right? And the same thing. So in between, all we're doing is we're adding on 45 degrees onto our 90. So we get 135 degrees, right? What's halfway in between? Halfway in between? Well, we just add 45. We figured that out in our step one. What was our adding on each time? Same thing for south of west is 225 degrees, and northwest similarly 315 degrees. So you do not have to remember those bearings, just how to find them if ever asked. So just remember, it's just halfway in between. And then you might be able to see how we're going to start doing the 16-point ones. So always put the 4 main directions first. So before, we talked about them in terms of in terms of our primary directions, north, right? We had our north, south, east, and west. Then we introduced this northwest, southwest, northeast, and southeast, right? So north of east, south of east, south of west, north of west, right? North of east. So these are these. So now, the very first one we're going to denote with an N, an S, an east, or a W, right? So, same thing, we got to kind of break it up. I'm going to go through the first little one for you to show you. So, here we know we have north. Then the next thing we know, we have northeast. Then we know we have east. So, I'm going to first off look at this case right here. Okay? And actually, I want to extend it to include that little box of ours, the one that we want to fill in. Okay? So if we look at here, we have north and we have northeast. So we have to put our one of the main directions first. So we only have north and northeast. So that stands to reason that the first thing we're going to put is north, and then the second thing we have to put, it's in between north and northeast, so it's north northeast. Right? So that's exactly what we get. We get north northeast, and then same thing. What's 45? We have 45, and we minus 0 and divide by 2, and we can find out our factor. So it's 22.5, which rounds up to 23. Since we can only have 3-figure, we can't have those decimal points. And also, you wouldn't actually find decimals in the real world, because being a point off of a degree when you're talking about airplanes is not going to change your overall. Okay, so that's why we've left it as 0, 2, 3. So your job now is to go through and solve out the rest. So pause the video. If you get stuck, press play, and then you can always pause again. Right. So we are looking at the next one. I'm going to go clockwise around. So we use clockwise a bunch in maths. So the next one, we have to add 23 degrees on, and we have to denote it. Well, it's closer to east this time, so it's going to be east of northeast. right? So if we're at northeast and we go a little bit more east, well, that's this line. Going around more, the closest thing is east, so we're going to say east of southeast, right? So we're doing it in terms of this middle direction. We're always do it in terms of those 8-point coordinates that I talked about earlier. So here we have southeast. So our next one has to be south-southeast. So we're going south of southeast, right? If we're right here, what's south of southeast? Well, this is south of southeast, right? Doesn't always look like it, but it's a weird naming system to get it for the first time. And we have south. We have south of southwest, southwest, west southwest, west, west south. Oh, sorry, that shouldn't say west southwest. That should say sorry. So south of or west of northwest, sorry. My apologies. So just fix this on the fly. We'll just cross it out and go west of northwest. Okay. And similarly, we keep going around northwest and north of northwest. Okay. And if you notice, every time we've just adding on this 23 degrees, right? From 0 degrees to northeast is 23. Then we do the 45. Then we add 23 onto that. So we're always adding 23 onto our main directions. That's why if you notice, if we added 23 degrees onto, say, 23 degrees, we'd get 46. But because we're basing it off of our normal measurements, we don't end up keep compounding our direction and the number.